So I was watching some coverage on the war in Gaza the other day that I felt like really missed the mark. So I thought we'd play a few of those clips here, and then I can provide some added context to hopefully help people better understand how this war is actually playing out on the ground. Now, these clips are coming from Breaking Points, which is an independent news organization. Breaking Points covers a lot of things all around the world, multiple times each week, whereas I am almost exclusively focused on covering war and conflict. So what I don't want to do is nitpick little minor details that don't overall impact the story or the coverage of what's happening in this war. I don't think that's what's happening here. I think there were some pretty big misses that maybe paint the wrong picture of how this war is being carried out. Now, I've said it before in a recent video, I do think the Breaking Points team is full of great people that are genuinely trying every single day to put their best work forward. So to the Breaking Points team, if you happen to come across this video, feel free to reach out anytime. I'm happy to talk through some of these subjects, maybe be a sounding board as needed before you dive into some of these things. It's subjects I'm spending a lot of time on every single day, and I think some of these missteps could be pretty easily corrected going forward. Now, diving in, let's go ahead and start with the first clip.
Mm-hmm. What is not talked about much in the U.S. here is that Israel's not doing well in the ground war. Like, they have effectively been able to turn most of Gaza into rubble, but when they have engaged with Hamas in street battles, they have often lost. We see almost daily videos of Israeli tanks getting blown up, of Israeli soldiers going down, getting evacuated. And so the question is, that's happening in these rubble-strewn areas. How do they physically do that in a densely populated area? A city that was like 300,000 people on October 6th is now like almost 1.5 million. Like, how do you even accomplish a street battle there?
So the reason that's not discussed very much here in the United States is because it's not true. Now, the context here is that they're pushing back on the idea of a Rafah operation in the southern portion of the Gaza Strip, talking about just how hard that would actually be for Israel to carry it out. And I agree. If and when that kicks off, because it's looking increasingly more likely, there's certainly going to be a lot of casualties all around. But the idea that Hamas is wiping the floor with Israel in fights all across Gaza is just not correct. So what Ryan is arguing here is at the tactical level. So I'm going to address that, but also get up to the strategic level, which I think is a different conversation entirely. So the tactical that we're talking about here is kind of day-to-day combat operations in Gaza. And it's generally what people think about when they think of war. It's the fighting and killing of enemy forces, by and large. So we can expand that in the scope of this war to include things like the destruction of enemy forces, the taking of terrain, or the reduction of an enemy's capability to project combat power. But in no way is Hamas beating Israel in any one of those. I mean, I know the casualty figures are a tricky point in this conflict, but I feel like we should at least start there. If we go off of each side's estimates, so Israel has said that they've lost 251 soldiers since the start of the ground war in Gaza, while a senior Hamas official in Qatar last month said that they estimate that they've lost around 6,000 total Hamas militants. So even if you throw like some skepticism on those numbers because they are being reported in the middle of a war, it takes some real work to get those casualty figures anywhere near equal. Then in terms of terrain, Israel now freely operates across most of Gaza, which was largely off limits before the war. I mean, when they kicked off their most recent raid into Shifa Hospital just a couple days ago, there were Palestinian accounts saying that Gaza is now just like the West Bank, where Israeli forces can go just about anywhere they want in short order. Now, we're quite a ways away from saying that the Gaza Strip is secure and fully cleared of all Hamas militants, but it's undeniable at this point that Hamas's control over the Gaza Strip has deteriorated significantly since this war began. They've lost a lot of territory to Israeli forces. Then in terms of the two sides' ability to wage this war going forward, it's becoming more and more one-sided by the day. I mean, yes, Hamas does release their occasional videos showing them attacking Israeli forces. Israel also puts out multiple videos every single day showing strikes against Hamas militants. So if we're going purely off of publicly available media, then Israel is releasing far more footage day in and day out of taking the fight to Hamas than the other way around. We can also look at Hamas's claimed rocket launches into Israel. This has almost entirely fallen off in recent weeks. In the opening days and weeks of this war, this was a major issue. Countless rockets and mortars were raining down on Israeli towns near the Gaza border. But if you go back through the official Hamas accounts, the ones that were bragging about all of their rocket launches into Israel back when this war first started, they haven't shown or even talked about a rocket launch into Israel in well more than a month now. So on the tactical side, no, there's not any real argument that Hamas is winning that side of the war against Israel. Now, the strategic aspect of things here is a little bit different. There's a very real argument to be had that Israel's tactics and how they're carrying out this war are causing more long-term harm than good, and that the total elimination of Hamas is an impossible goal. Look, there's a lot of very valid arguments to be had around both of those, and we'll see over time how they play out. But in terms of the tactical fight, or the street battles as they're referred to in this clip, Israel is overwhelmingly winning that aspect of this war.
Let's put A2 up on the screen, because this investigation from Al Jazeera and the Washington Post, this is from the Washington Post, they did an investigation about what happened to two members of an Al Jazeera crew, and Al Jazeera has presented some more evidence about this as well. Drone footage, this is the headline, raises questions about Israeli justification for deadly strike on Gaza journalists. This was in Han Yunis. Two members of Al Jazeera's crew, a 27-year-old and a 30-year-old, were killed on January 7th, along with their driver. Then two freelance journalists were seriously wounded. They were returning from the scene of an earlier Israeli strike on a building where they had used a drone to capture the aftermath. The Washington Post actually on their website has footage of them operating the drone footage that they were taking. It's a drone that was being used. It's like available at Best Buy. It's basically a commercially available, normal drone that civilians would use. IDF said in a statement the next day that it had, quote, identified and struck a terrorist who operated an aircraft that posed a threat to IDF troops. 2 days later, the IDF said that it had been in response to, quote, an immediate threat in the area because both men belonged to militant groups. This was the claim from the IDF. It doesn't appear that was the case. There's some evidence that Israel is pointing to. I think it's like a name in a log,
right?
That Israel is pointing to that one of them was affiliated with Hamas in some way. But it's pretty unconvincing evidence. I'm curious what you thought of this.
So the evidence is there. We're just kind of dialed in on the wrong part. I mean, I can tell you why this vehicle was struck with the three people inside. It's because they were operating a drone in Gaza. You couldn't pay me enough right now to throw up a random drone in Gaza in the middle of an active war zone. That is a surefire way to be on the receiving end of a hellfire strike. It's just, look, Gaza is pretty tight right now in terms of Israeli electronic warfare coverage. They know anything and everything that goes up into the airspace. I mean, all you have to do is look at the war playing out in Ukraine right now to see just how important drones are to modern combat. And those drones, for the most part, are not military grade. They are the off-the-shelf Radio Shack style drones you can just order off Amazon that are doing significant damage to military forces on the battlefield. It's a very, very real threat. These commercial style drones that look so innocent that anybody can buy can be used to turn into a makeshift missile, these FPV drones that are flown into the side of tanks and detonate, destroying multi-million-dollar pieces of equipment. They can drop grenades on enemy forces, or they can be used with no munitions or adjustments at all, just sitting up overhead, scanning the area to identify possible targets for mortars, missiles, ambushes, anything of the sort. And here's the thing with electronic warfare. It's not just a matter of identifying that a drone is in the airspace or jamming the drone and causing it to crash. You can also identify where the operator is. Right? This is a real threat we're seeing play out every single day in Ukraine, where the drone operators are being hunted. Right? You take down the drone however you can, and then you go after the person actually manning that drone and eliminate that threat as well. Gaza is an active war zone right now. So anybody that throws a drone up unexpectedly anywhere in Gaza immediately becomes a target. I got it, that might not sound good, and the person flying that drone might be 100% purely innocent. You just have to know your operating environment. You cannot, in a small, very active war zone where the two sides are really watching the drone threat, throw one of those up overhead with an unsecure signal back to your location, thinking that nothing's going to happen. Again, that might not sound good. It might sound heartless. That is the reality of modern war. The same thing would happen in Ukraine. If you sent somebody out to Ukraine to throw up a commercial off-the-shelf drone just to see what the battlefields look like, they are immediately going to become a target for the opposing side as soon as they dial in that location. That's why these guys were targeted. It's not a big surprise. They were flying a drone in an active combat zone, and drones are one of the most significant threats to modern militaries today.
It's this weird, I think gaslighting is overused in our current contemporary lexicon, but it really does apply to the coverage of this war. So the Washington Post writes here, and good for the Washington Post for conducting this investigation. This is not shade on them, but they write that no Israeli soldiers, aircraft, or other military equipment are visible in the footage taken that day, which the Post is publishing in its entirety, raising critical questions about why the journalists were targeted. Fellow reporters said they were unaware of troop movements in the area. So what they're saying is there was no reason that they can identify, either from witnesses or from drone footage, but there was a security concern going on here. Yet these journalists were struck anyway. It says it kind of raises questions about why the journalists were targeted. In the days after they were targeted, Israel said publicly they targeted them on purpose because of these claimed links. And so that's where the gaslighting comes in. It's like, raises questions about why they were targeting. Israel's like, no, we hit the journalists on purpose. This is the Al Jazeera Gaza bureau chief's son who was killed in this in strike. And they're saying, look, he's a terrorist. Like there's two freelance journalists that were killed here too. They're all terrorists, and we hit them on purpose. And so to then use investigative resources to go back and say, doesn't seem to be any reason why they were struck. When, implying that perhaps maybe they were struck on purpose, when Israel has already said they were struck on purpose, is kind of crazy making, I think, for an audience who's like, wait a minute, they already admitted why they did this.
And then the last one here, which I feel like is on the verge of me getting nitpicky, but I feel like it's an important aspect because it kind of shapes how this conversation is being had. If we look at the Israeli statement from January 10th, they said IDF troops detected a hostile drone near Rafah, an immediate threat to nearby soldiers. An IAF aircraft was dispatched to target the drone's operators. Subsequently, Palestinian media reported the deaths of journalist Hamza al-Dadou and Mustafa Thuria during the strike. However, IDF intelligence has confirmed that both the deceased were members of Gaza-based terrorist organizations actively involved in attacks against IDF forces. Prior to the strike, the two operated drones, posing an imminent threat to IDF troops. Now, the way that this aspect is being presented in the Breaking Point segment is that Israel has time and again said these guys were targeted because they were affiliated with Hamas and Palestinian Islamic Jihad, which there is some nuance there as well. Hamas, yes, governing entity across Gaza. Everybody in Gaza is going to have some sort of affiliation with Hamas, not with Palestinian Islamic Jihad. That is a purely militant organization. There's no governing aspect to PIJ. Either way, the way that I read this at the time of this event and now, and maybe this is incorrect, is that the day that this happened, Al Jazeera came out and said Israel targeted journalists for being journalists. And then Israel had to come out and say, wait a minute, by the way, they were operating a drone, which an unknown drone operating over anywhere near friendly forces in an active war zone like Gaza is going to be viewed as a threat. So they eliminated that threat. And then Israel came back on top of that and said, by the way, these innocent journalists that you're reporting on, we also believe were affiliated with Hamas and Palestinian Islamic Jihad. I never saw where Israel pointed to that affiliation as the reason for the strike, as in they were hunting these guys because of that affiliation. The reason that they were struck, that I've seen throughout this reporting, is because they were operating a drone in Gaza, which, as mentioned before, is a surefire way to be targeted. That just the volume of electronic warfare measures covering the Gaza Strip right now, one of those drones goes up, it doesn't matter how innocent you are or how connected you are to a militant organization. Israel is going to quickly be able to identify the drone as well as the operator location, and they're probably going to carry out a strike very quickly. I can understand the argument of, well, why not wait and see what they were looking at or what they were near before you actually kill those people involved with the drone. It's just the nature of war, and it's not good. I got it. But those drones can so quickly cause significant damage, you can't always afford to wait. So in a hotly contested environment like right now in the Gaza Strip, it is understandable that Israel would view any drone thrown up overhead that they are not directly controlling as a hostile threat. All right, so I did have to clip some of these segments to make the video, a reasonable length and not 30 minutes of their conversation and then kind of interjecting with my thoughts. I really wasn't trying to take anything out of context. I think the clips that I got here provide the overall gist of what they were trying to present in their argument. But either way, I'll link their full conversation in the description below if you want to check that out in its entirety without my annoying face stepping in to interrupt from time to time. But either way, I hope this provided a little extra context to how some of these events are playing out. It's complicated, it's messy. And again, I think the crew at Breaking Points is full of good people. They're genuinely every single day trying to do their absolute best work and put the best information forward. It's just when looking at war and conflict, I understand that they're not spending all of their time on these subjects, whereas that is where I spend the majority of my time. So some of these tend to stand out. But either way, that's all I got for now. Thanks for watching, and I'll see y'all next time.